He will be moderating the next panel, which I'm very, very excited about. It is on energy transition and renewable integration. Obviously, we've covered that a little bit earlier on today with the opening panel we had, and building a decarbonised energy system. So I will hand once again over to Ian, who I'm very confident that will moderate this extremely well. So over to you, Ian.
Thanks again, Adam, and yes, welcome to everybody to the second panel. As Adam said, energy transition and renewable integration. So, I'm delighted to welcome the panelists, and if I can go through them, probably well as I see them on my screen at least, and I hope you see the same order as well. So I'll go around the table. So Mathieu is a public and relations advisor for Elia, based in Brussels. Graeme Cooper, the head of future markets at National Grid. Daxita, Rajcoomar is the chief sustainability officer at ENGIE, based in Dubai. Jenny Taylor, good morning to Jenny. Very early morning for Jenny in Charleston, South Carolina, who is the digital transformation and innovation lead at Duke Energy. And across the water to Oslo, Guro Knapstad is the innovation lead and energy transition at Glitre Energy, as I say, based in Oslo. So welcome to the panelists. What a fantastic lineup we have here. What I'd like to do is start with a sort of, I guess, the basic exam question, which about decarbonizing the whole energy system. And I think I'd just like to get some initial views from anybody about the key aspects of what we need to do and when we need to do it. So Mathieu, if I can start with you, just your initial thoughts on the whole issue of energy transition and decarbonization.
Yes, thank you, Ian. Yeah, obviously the energy transition is a huge challenge for TSO, and our core mission being responsible for real-time balancing between production and consumption is going to change drastically. Coming from a country where half of the production was made by a nuclear power unit, and we are now facing more and more renewable energy that is being fed to the grid. And for us, we see it as a challenge, sure, but as well as an opportunity, because we see that actually, if we seize the right opportunities at the right time, we can manage the cost of the energy transition and we can foster the energy transition. And one of the key aspects I would like to discuss with you today is how we can digitalize the market to make sure that actually it supports this transition. And one of the key aspects in that perspective is it relates to market design, because we see at the moment that we have a lot of difficulties to actually trigger the right behavior, which means that if we do not do nothing, we will have to dimension the grid in a way that it will have to absorb all the production of renewable energy when there is sun, when there is wind, and also when there is none of it, and which means that we will have to rely a lot on interconnection. And by having a right price signal for all consumers, meaning the end consumer, sure, but also small and medium-sized companies, it should trigger the right behavior to use the energy when it's abundant and sparing it in time of scarcity. And in this regard, I believe that we need automatization because it's for sure not the consumer that is going to be on his iPhone every 2 minutes to make sure that he can charge his car because it's cheaper, because he can heat his home because it's a bit cheaper. So there is a lot to do in that perspective, and we are not there yet. We haven't even started yet. And for me, that's a key aspect that should be tackled in the near future.
Thanks, Mathieu. And I think yes, I mean the challenges, I guess, in terms of the grid, and I'll maybe go to Graeme for this one. So Mathieu talked about that need for flexibility and the balancing, I guess, between, you know, supply and demand. What are the key challenges, Graeme, for you as a network operator?
So firstly, it's really important that we're asking the difficult questions, right? Yeah, will the grid cope? What needs to change? I guess a couple of points that I want to make is, firstly, the transition that we're on is not starting today. If we think about the changes that we've seen, we've been on this journey for about 20 years with that transition away from thermal-based, you know, typically coal and gas. You know, in the UK, we have more than 50% of our energy demand is met from clean sources, you know, from not burning stuff. So actually, when we think about this transition, it's more about how does the transition happen further, faster. And don't forget, the consumer and business hasn't seen that change in how and where power is generated. You know, what happens when you throw the chasm? Then these will be by those who are the consumers of energy. And what that really means for me is to consumer democratization of energy. So I know you don't like the term prosumer. I don't really like it either. The best way I describe it is democratization of energy. We can all now play a part in the energy transition, and some of that automation, from my perspective, is happening already. And then I'll explain what I think that means for grids. So already, dynamic retail tariffs. We have digital APIs that you know. So National Grid publishes the real-time carbon intensity of the grid, and regionally as well as nationally, and with a 2-day forecast. So I already, since 2017, my car charger charges my car when the grid is cleanest and cheapest from those signals. And it matches to the digital API that comes from my energy retailer. So showing by doing is really important. But the other disconnect, I guess, from my perspective is there was a comment you made around that regulatory environment. We need anticipatory investment. Typically seen is regulate for no regrets, and you know, least regrets is the way we need to go forward. And what was actually encouraging for me is in a recent statement in the House of Commons, in the future energy bill, there will be some direction around anticipatory investment. But that anticipatory investment for new infrastructure is not a case of grids. What we need to do is to bring the two together so that we're investing wires to be optimized. Now, that does two things. One, clever digital optimization buys us time to build infrastructure, but the infrastructure that is built not the way grids in the past is to peak plus headroom.
Thanks, Graeme. That's really, really interesting. And I think, you know, that how consumers operate within that environment, I think is going to be extremely interesting, and particularly the way they behave. You know, it's not just about technology; it's about consumer behavior as well. Jenny, if I can come to you, I think you're doing quite a lot to try, or Duke Energy doing a lot to try and help consumers understand exactly what sort of carbon footprints they have. Can you explain a little more?
Of course. I mean, you're talking about the consumer, and it really starts there. We can help in that transition, but energy needs to be used. And so helping the really consumer understand their energy use is really important. So we've built a lot of carbon emissions calculators. We really focus on the large account or the large accounts, your big box retailers and such, your Walmarts, Publix, to show them really what their actual footprint is. And we're using digital technologies to do that, to really see in live time, as well as, you know, in the past, and what we plan to predict in the future as their carbon footprint, and showing them actively how to reduce that carbon footprint. We already have, you know, a 50% reduction goal by 2030 and a net zero carbon reduction goal by 2050. So here's how you can get there by doing nothing. But if you do something, if you are actively reducing your carbon emissions, then you can help us reduce our carbon emissions. And overall, it really helps each other. So having these calculators, having these tools available for the consumers to use is really important. And helping, you talked about us knowing our carbon footprint. You asked me that yesterday. I wasn't able to answer that. And I thought just electricity. I didn't think about driving my car and the food that I eat and the planes that I fly on. but really using, making consumers more aware of their carbon footprint, where their electricity comes from, is very important in helping overall the carbon reduction goals across the world, really.
Thanks, Jenny. Excellent stuff. And of course, the electricity part is only part of the equation. There's going to be a multi-vector energy system here that we're going to have to get used to, which is, I guess, going to be subtly different to the one that we currently use. And Guro in Norway, you're doing some really, really innovative stuff in hydrogen.
Yeah, definitely. We've been trying to be kind of a first mover into this hydrogen sector. What we're doing, we're coming from a vertically integrated power company. We're having 100% green hydropower, and we have a lot of run-of-river hydropower. So what we are thinking of trying to do is to see if we can maximize the value of our run-of-river hydropower together with producing green hydrogen. Because what we see now recently is, of course, this increased volatility in the power prices as more wind and solar is coming on stream. And in Norway, at least, we have price collapses during the middle of the day. And in the run-of-river hydropower, naturally, it's not so easy to optimize the production because we need to produce when the water is running by our power plants, while on the contrary, the ones with the storage opportunities can just turn off their hydropower production. So what we are trying to do is that we will put an electrolyzer and produce green hydrogen on our power plant. So when the prices are collapsing, or at least are lower than on maximum, we will produce to hydrogen. And when we are having high prices, then we can produce as normally to the grid. But the problem has been in Norway, and I think many places in Europe right now, is this chicken and egg situation where no one is investing because no one is having opportunity to do the offtake. There are no offtakers. So what we have been successful in doing is establishing a partnership with it's a startup in Norway called Applied Hydrogen, and they will start retrofitting diggers, 30-ton diggers that cannot be run on battery electric, because that is important as well. Point to note that we believe strongly that hydrogen is really needed in the energy transition, but it will be a complement to the direct electrification in the first place and battery electric solutions in the second place. But where they can't be used, then we need to have the hydrogen solutions. So as they are retrofitting their first diggers, they will need a small amount of hydrogen, enough that we can have a proper offtake for a pilot, and not too large so that our board is they're comfortable of taking the investment decisions very soon, we hope. So I hope that we will be, this is a good way of getting this market started. That's our goal.
Good. Thanks very much, Guro. I think, I mean, it's interesting that, hydrogen features highly in Norway, a big oil and gas producer, of course, lots of expertise in terms of producing gas. And Daxita is exactly the same in the Middle East, isn't it? In terms of, your aspirations for hydrogen as a primary fuel vector.
Oh, absolutely. I think, the Middle East, particularly UAE and Saudi Arabia, have stated their intentions to be the powerhouse for hydrogen production and the major global exporter for this green hydrogen. But, just to go back a little bit, we know that hydrogen is still one of the energy vectors in innovation to decarbonize towards the energy transition. But a study was done by IRENA, which is the International Renewable Energy Agency, which stated that To meet the 1.5 degree scenario, this means that clean hydrogen or green hydrogen could only meet up to 12% of the final energy consumption by 2050. So this goes to show that hydrogen is just one element of the energy vectors that supports the decarbonization strategies and net zero commitments. Of course, renewables plays a big part. Blue hydrogen, especially in the Middle East, being petrostate, industries, which is ultimately the bridge to decarbonizing these sectors, which is important. And we see that, with hydrogen these days, water is now becoming the new coal of the future, of course, posing some of the challenges around water scarcity, but we won't go into that conversation today. So there's lots of opportunities when it comes to hydrogen in this market. I know that UAE has a hydrogen strategy already announced, where they aim to ensure 25% of that global low carbon hydrogen market by 2030. So yes, there's still challenges. I think, development around regulations, facilitating financing, ensuring, the demand side agreements are in place, whether it is from government to governments or countries to, within the region, or whether it is those public-private investments and partnerships that are needed to grow this hydrogen industry. We also see that, ENGIE specifically, as part of these pilot programs that we are launching in the region, is we've signed a $5 billion investment with Mazda, where the aim is to produce hydrogen by 2030, and that entails a 2 gigawatt electrolyzer to produce hydrogen, supporting actually the ammonia industry as an offtake. So we are seeing a lot of these pilot hydrogen projects mushrooming or in the last year and 2 years. But we know that, these are really to iron out the challenges that it may pose before it gets scaled up to support the energy strategies of countries.
Thanks so much. That really paints I think a very clear picture as to how far hydrogen penetrates, I suppose, into the network. The sort of 12% that you calculated there, which I think is very, very similar to a recent report in the UK, which I guess brings me on to the sort of the new systems, the future systems. I mean, clearly we have a national system to be able to, but it also drives, I guess, local systems, local area energy networks. And Graeme, I'd be really interested just to hear your view about, where do those two systems meet, and how do they interact?
Really great question. I think picking up on a couple of points as well before I answer that question. What's really nice from the conversation we've had so far is the realization that the isn't everything, or the answer hydrogen everything. And what we often see is that tribalism. I think we need to, the debate needs to mature. We need everything. And where does that show up? I mean, I think that we're seeing a few things happening. So in the UK, the electricity system operator is becoming a fully independent business over the next few years, that's separate from the wires business. What we've also seen from a government perspective is the regional distribution network operators are becoming distribution system operators. So actually, in the world we're moving into, if you separate the wires from the system operation, you get that purity of how markets can operate, that full independence, which I'm sure is coming. Also, is the fact we need those big national targets, so large-scale interconnection, large-scale offshore wind, large-scale nuclear, large-scale onshore wind. So those will come forward for the volume of energy we require. So that does need big networks. But we also need to recognize the importance of short travel, local energy, local networks, local markets. And what you need is that whole system thinking for that to act as a homogenized energy system. And that's really where we sort of loop back around to that, bringing energy, transport, and digital energy, heat, and digital. Now, the things that don't change in that is the energy vector and the digital vector. So the ability for there to be that digital innovation to join up the dots. The energy networks, both at transmission and distribution, are built to that peak room, and that peak plus headroom happens for maybe half an hour once a year, which shows that really for the rest of the time, networks are not optimized. And so with that management, at least starting at the domestic level, with consumption and charging cars, that will help that whole systems approach. But one of the things I wanted to point out is I know we sort of mentioned sort of the growth in EVs in discussions up until now. If we think forward from a UK perspective to 2050, the Committee on Climate in their scenarios, and the balanced scenario is probably the most likely. They indicate the UK will consume probably at least twice the amount of electricity than we do today. That in turn means the need for 4 times the amount of clean generation than we have today. And that means twice the grid capacity than we have today. Now, that's not twice the wires, that's twice the grid capacity. And that will need to happen everywhere. But of that doubling of consumption, what we see is about 15 to 20% of that 100% load vehicle is transport. Somewhere between 60% of that load growth is for heat. And so one of the things I think will be really important is as the decarbonisation of transport moves first, and the smart charging and the ability for EV charging to support the grid as much as be a problem for the grid, how do we quickly apply that into decarbonising the heating system? Because from a UK, 80% of the 86% of the UK is heated on gas, and we will be obviously transitioning away from that as a pure market. And so I think we can't think of this as just electricity, just gas. We can't think of it as electrify or just hydrogen or just electrify. I think it does need that maturity for that whole system thinking, and to take that early understanding of transmission system operation, how it evolves into distribution system operation, and ultimately where we'll probably get to, which is just a one system operator in the fullness of time. I mean, that's a little further out there, but I think, as you said before, there is no instruction book to get to net zero. There's no instruction book to decarbonise the energy system. But at least I know from the UK perspective, decarbonising the energy system is not 2050, it's 2035. So there is a real urgency to learn quick, to take some risk, and fail fast and innovate.
A really clear picture there. And I think, Mathieu, you were talking about this as well, I guess, in terms of how the network operates, the attributes of the network, which I think have got to change to accommodate things like EVs. Energy storage is going to be important, and digitalization, I know, is clearly a key to that. I mean, can you describe exactly how Elia are thinking in terms of the need to digitalize the network in order to enable everything that Graeme's just talked about?
Yeah, maybe to come back on what Graeme just said, we face basically the same challenges in Belgium, because there is clearly a need for decentralization and to have energy produced where it's consumed. But at the same time, the government makes choices where a lot of renewable energy is produced at the same place. Being in the North Sea, where we are about to have 4 gigawatts of offshore wind that will be produced basically in the same place. And for that, we need also a grid that is capable to support such production. So I really agree with Graeme on this one, that we need both legs to actually walk towards the future. And to come back to your question about digitalization, what is important also from a TSO perspective is access to data. It is actually a key aspect to better forecast consumption. Because right now it's quite clear where consumption is going to happen and how the grid will function. But in the coming years, we will have to handle much more variation depending on the weather forecast, depending on how much traffic is there on the road and when the people are going to charge their car. And one of the burning topics right now in Belgium is, can we actually have a centralized smart meter data that is available for the TSO and also for private companies, with, of course, respect to the GDPR regulation? But could we actually have a centralized system, both for balancing aspect and for private purposes? And this is also a key that we have to move forward with digitalization if we want to actually go forward.
Oh, I think we've lost Ian. Are you back, Ian?
We
Can
cannot
you hear me
you,
okay?
at least. Yeah, okay, now we can.
Oh, good. Yeah, sorry about that. Lost the connection there. It's typical in these things. That's one of the vagaries of virtual conferences. Mathieu, thanks very much for that. And you touched there on smart meter data as well. Clearly, very important. And Jenny, I know, Duke are doing quite a lot on smart meter data at the minute. Trying to get the information back that Matthew's just described. Could you just tell us exactly what you're trying to do there?
Of course. Well, everyone knows that data is the new gold, right? So being able to have an influx of data, now we have smart meters throughout our 8.2 million customers, minus a few. So having all that data, what do you do with it then? What can you do to understand the grid, the health of the grid, and be able to maybe do demand response or distributed energy resources technology? So taking that information in and then being able to do something with it is key. And that's where digital transformation comes in. And understanding, Graeme was talking about the EVs coming onto the market. That's a big threat right now to our grid that was built in the 50s in the US here. And very small sections have been updated. But really having this data come in, having this grid now be completely digital, to where from the home to the transmission lines to actually producing the electricity, now we can understand what that entire grid looks like and be able to optimize it, understand the health of each transformer. If you bring 5 electric vehicles into the same neighborhood, can that transformer handle it? So being able to talk back and forth, there's now two-way communication on these smart meters, and we're actually putting digital products onto transformers and onto lines. And so being able to really understand completely what the health of the grid is, then where to invest the money to update the grid per what came back on that digital atmosphere, to show you really what needs to be updated, where you need to focus first. Obviously, we can now tell by doing some kind of analytics, we can now tell actually when neighborhoods are adding electric vehicles to the market, or to the grid. So we're able to really ingest all this information and do something with it, learn from it, and increase the technology, increase the grid. We're able to, harden the grid with, batteries and, like I said, distributed energy. So really being able to take that information in and be active for our consumers, and allowing more things to come onto the grid, and allowing us to update our technology and our grid, obviously.
Thanks, Jenny. And I'll actually stay with you on another topic, which is nuclear. We haven't talked a lot about that, but I know that there's very much a push for nuclear in certain countries, the UK certainly, and the US as well. So Duke, I know, view nuclear as a as a key technology to make that energy transition. So how does that investment look like? What does it actually look like from a Duke Energy perspective?
That's a great question. And as we know, there haven't been a lot of new builds of nuclear within the U.S., especially in large-scale nuclear. I know there are some that are coming online. I think 2 new units in Georgia, but it's been a very difficult transition. We already have operating nuclear facilities. We have several of those, so that really helps with that carbon-free emission. It's very, very important to have that as part of our energy resources there. But really looking into small modular reactors and advanced nuclear reactors is very important to see where that's coming. I know a lot of things are coming on the market in regards to nuclear and nuclear technology. It's so important. It's key to having really clean, reliable energy. I was nuclear for over a decade. I very much support that, especially in our carbon-free emission future. It's really difficult to meet those goals without adding more nuclear, as well as keeping the nuclear facilities that we have operating today on the grid. So being able to convince everyone and help people understand the benefits of nuclear is very important too. So we can look into the small modular reactors, and we can look into the advancement of all the nuclear that's coming on the line today. But if we don't have consumers that believe in it and understand it and can realize the health of really everyone is beneficial with having this clean, reliable energy, especially as we add more electric vehicles onto the grid, and even as transportation, buses, the Amazon packages that are delivered are all now electric vehicles as well. So adding all this new demand onto the electric grid, and then being able to have a sustainable, something that we don't have brownouts, so having that clean, reliable energy is very important. So we're really looking into how can we invest in nuclear in the future, as well as keeping our current nuclear operating online today.
Thank you. That's a very, very clear position, I think. I mean, a great segue from I guess networks onto transport. You mentioned transport there being clearly a large sector to decarbonize. Guro, I know that in terms of the hydrogen that you were talking about, you're also talking about production of ammonia and really looking at the marine sector. In terms of Norway's activities, obviously a huge sector for Norway. How do you view I guess the choice of fuels that perhaps the marine sector can take? There could be electric vehicles or electric ferries. A lot of electric ferries in Norway. It could be powered by hydrogen. It could be powered by ammonia. How does the landscape look in Norway for transport right now?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think a lot of ship owners are asking themselves the same question. As you say, we have a lot of electric ferries, and we have that's working well. They have been charged by the ferry terminals normally, and if they don't have enough power, then we will use some large batteries. And what we see with our hydrogen pilots that were up and running, we want to supply hydrogen to the marine sector in our area, close to Drammen, where Glitre Energy is based. A small port or medium size, where all the electric cars actually are coming in and distributed throughout Norway, or most of them. And we see that they are having hesitations because when they have to retrofit their ships, it will be a decision taken for 25 years. And they don't know if that should be ammonia or hydrogen or some kind of other e-fuel. And that also is part of this chicken and egg, and the reason why there are not any large hydrogen or ammonia plants having the investment decisions taken yet, because there are no off-takers to secure the off-taking production demand. But what we believe, we are a small, medium-sized, I guess, vertically integrated power company. So we will focus on the hydrogen production, and we believe that there will be local hydrogen production with local hydrogen demand. So we will fuel the road transport, heavy long-haul transportations will probably have some demand for hydrogen, and these heavy vehicles or these diggers and construction sites that we believe will start to order more vehicles. And then on the marine sector, I think there are some certain some certain distances of medium-sized distances that can have pressurized hydrogen, and they will have. We have a few, I think, in Norway under construction, or at least planning and design. But it takes a bit of time before this maritime sector is really getting going. And to export hydrogen, I think it will be done either as ammonia or through pipelines, possibly with blue hydrogen. That's at least what we're thinking. So as we are based in where there are more demand for the local off-takers, we will focus on the hydrogen. And also to add on that, you were talking on this the more and more EVs coming on stream, and the flexibility that us as car owners we need to contribute as well. And Norway, we have of course a lot of electric cars, and what has been will be implemented now is new grid tariffs, grid fee tariffs that will be cheaper during the night. So we hope, and I think all the DSOs in Norway have agreed on a similar system, so that it will be like this for everyone. Different small differences between utilities, but we hope that this will trigger demand responsibility, so that we will not demand responses, and to enable the flexibility in the consumer side to help out on the grid situation. So that's going to be interesting going forward.
It's a really interesting transition in Norway, and yeah, I mean the commitment to, or at least government commitment, I guess, to electric vehicles with not having to pay VAT. I think it's just it's a tremendous incentive to shift a whole population thinking, I guess. And I mean, Daxita, how do ENGIE view this? Particularly in the Middle East. Again, a huge transport hub. And I know that, I mean, you're doing some work with some of the Guro mentioned diggers, but big mining trucks. You're trying to decarbonize those as well. How does ENGIE view this in the Middle East?
So, well, one of our pilot projects, which we launched about a year and a half ago, it was in Africa, with South Africa in particular, with the mining industry, where they needed to decarbonize already stigmatized industry. And a part of the pilot project, which was initially launched as the Rhino project, and now in its operational phase, it's called the New Gen project, was to look at these mining haul trucks, and I'm talking massive trucks that probably consume about 3,000 liters of diesel per day. And working with the client is to find a solution that where these hydrogen or green hydrogen can power these trucks. Now we're talking about, mining industries have about, with this particular mining industry has about over 40 trucks. So you can, just imagine the amount of diesel being consumed in the CO2 footprint. So the project really entailed building a small, electrolyzer on site, producing green hydrogen, and then as a supply for these hydrogen trucks. The client was responsible, of course, for retrofitting the truck into a fuel cell hydrogen truck. And this project actually was effectively launched a few months ago, where these trucks are now operational. The one pilot, with the intention of scaling it up to 40 of the other trucks. But this is, the testament that it is possible. Yes, it is a pilot to iron out all of the challenges before it can be scaled up. But this ultimately tells you that, clients or the end consumer, whether it is B2B clients or B2C clients, are becoming wiser to sustainability goals and driving their own decarbonization, actions. So it is real. Change is happening, and especially when it comes to transportation. Yes, it hasn't gained ground in terms of the other sectors in terms of the energy transition as a supply to grids, but we're starting to see momentum, especially around logistical supplies around aviation, marine transportation, and B2B clients like a mining industry as well.
And what about the marine sector in the Middle East as well? I mean, it's a huge sector, a big hub for marine, and maybe even aviation. And any views from ENGIE about that?
With aviation, in the Middle East, we haven't begun any pilot projects to date, but we do know that UAE with Mazda has partnered with Total Energies and Siemens Energies, where they are building a pilot a plant on green hydrogen in Abu Dhabi to produce e-fuels or sustainable aviation fuel. Now, this is still pilot project, of course, but we're starting to see the momentum, especially around aviation and marine environments. But it hasn't really tapped the market at the scale to date. But it's beginning. Nothing that's scalable in the region to date.
Thanks very much. It's interesting a lot. We've been talking here about the supply side and how we transmit and distribute energy to the consumers, whether it's whether it's electricity or hydrogen or ammonia. It does presuppose, of course, that the consumers make the choices and the changes that are necessary in order to enable this to happen. So if I can turn the whole telescope around and look at it from a consumer point of view, Jenny, as a consumer, what do you need to do in order to support this energy transition to net zero?
That's a great question. Something I really hadn't thought about, even though this is what I do every single day, is try to convince our consumers and convince our electric users to reduce their carbon footprint. But I think the most important thing is a lot of utilities, at least here in America, we offer a lot of programs. The first thing we started doing is giving out free LED light bulbs to make sure that everyone transitions their home to an LED bulb, which, yes, you can reduce your consumption. And we do talk about different times of the day where we don't have as many plants cycling on and off to be able to use those electric things. During those times, we talk about plugging in your EV and charging at night, having that kind of demand of charging when. And as a consumer, I think we only think about money. We think about how can I save money, not how can I save electricity, or how can I save or reduce my carbon footprint. I noticed when I flew Delta recently, they told me, do you want to see what your carbon footprint was by flying? And I thought, I guess I never really thought about that. And so I think the first part is education. Everyone is all about clean energy and decarbonization, but really it starts with education. So we need to start at the school level, educating the children and educating so they can educate their parents and vice versa. I think, again, it starts with education. And then from there, we can start having actionable items, hearing about it more, knowing how to take action. I remember growing up hearing recycle, reduce, reuse. And so we were taught that. It's stuck in your brain. And I still today recycle, reduce, and reuse. So can we do something similar to that and doing a little PR bit on decarbonization and teaching the world to, as a consumer, reduce your carbon footprint? What does that look like and how can you do it? Because I know we only think I'm only one person. So if I don't drive today, or if I convert to an electric vehicle, not using gas anymore, am I really making a difference? But you multiply that times, let's say, our 8.2 million electric customers and our 1.6 million gas customers. It only takes one, which turns into two, which turns into three. So educating everyone to then take actions to reduce their own carbon footprint is very important. And I think that's where we can really make the difference. We are not just one, because as a whole, we are everything. We are everyone. We are the world. So where does it start?
Brilliant, thank you, Mathieu. What about Elia and your own position about taking that sort of leadership? We heard from Jenny there about dishing out LED light bulbs to consumers. That's a really interesting way of going about it, isn't it?
Yeah, to follow up on what Jenny said, of course, money is a key aspect, but another one is actually, I think, to offer the customer a real choice. At the moment, you can have a green contract in Belgium, which means that your energy should come from a renewable source. And as Guro said, we have the same in Belgium, which means that we can have this day and night tariff, which would encourage the people to consume during the night, because we rely heavily on nuclear power plants. So of course, they produce the whole night, and so we're trying to make a use of that. But except that, the choice of the consumer at the moment is rather limited. And I think if we want to improve this side, we should offer more choices. For example, if you have an electric vehicle right now and you're going to a friend, it will not be possible to charge your car there and to be built directly at your home. If you have solar devices on top of your roof and you're going for 2 weeks on holidays, you cannot say to your friend, if you want to use my production, my green production, you can do it. And we can do it easily through an app, and you're going to benefit from renewable energy. And I think this is a key aspect, that at the moment we are not giving the consumer all the tools for him to actually embark in this transition. And that's one of the aspects we have to work on. And at Elia, we are actually sandboxing a few companies to try to see if there is actually an appetite from the consumer side to make use of this kind of projects. And we see that there is one, that the consumer is ready because he want to be part of the energy transition. This is an important topic, and for most of the consumer, they are ready to take a few steps to help, but we have to make it happen on a regulatory side, and that's what that is the missing piece at the moment.
Thank you for that. That's and regulation is one of these things that I think covers every aspect of or many aspects of what we've talked about. Maybe the same question to Guro. I mean, you're in I guess in the smug zone, because you're Norway's a big oil and gas producer, but electricity's been and hydroelectricity has been a fundamental part of Norway's energy vector for many decades. So what else do the Norwegians need to do to take that personal leadership?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And when you asked about this, my private CO2 footprint, I was thinking, oh my God, I have no idea. But as Norwegians, as you mentioned, we are used to have cheap and green electricity. We drive electric cars. Everyone I know, of course, have an electric car, and 100% green power into my house. So I think my scope 1 footprint is probably rather low, but what we have to be better at in Norway is definitely energy efficiency and saving, not using energy and not we're leaving the lights on, and I think this winter has been very corrective for us in Norway. Then we have really felt the energy bill in our wallets. So I think that's important, and definitely I totally copy what Jenny said about education and intelligence and information. And when you know if you know your electricity consumption, which people have been more and more aware of, as the prices have actually been incredibly high in Norway as well this winter, then it educates you, and you realize, oh really, how much do I really have for refrigerators, and I should definitely turn off the heating in the basement when we're not at home. So I think insight, and that will come by more smart meters, when that's rolled out in Norway, I think we have close to 100% rollout of smart meters as well. Then there can be more digital solutions, and also both on a personal and private level, but also on a more system level, where I know also Kongsberg is doing a lot with. Lasse Jant was presenting just before us about this Cognitwin grid that they're having as well, and probably something that Duke is, I'm not quite sure, but sounded like you were also doing some of these things. So I think insight and data will help us have solutions both on the personal private level and on the more system level.
Yeah, thanks, Guro. Really interesting. Daxita, you're not in the same position at all. You're in the middle of the largest oil and gas producing countries on the planet. So I guess your challenge is somewhat different.
Well, the challenges are pretty much the same, not the heating, but the cooling. But I guess I concur with my panelists here, is that, it is about educating the consumers around energy efficiency, especially, as we reach the energy transition and energy mix into the grids. And some of these strategies are 2030, 2040, and 2050. So there is a lot of time to bring the innovative solutions to the grid for it to become decarbonized or cleaner. But one thing we can influence is the consumer behavior and the consumer actions. And what we start to see here, as much as we have energy targets from a supply side, we have energy targets as well on a efficiency perspective. So, for example, in the UAE, we have a target of 24% to ensure energy efficiency. So it's educating your business owners, your landlords, right down to the consumers to implement those smart meters, whether it's connected to your Apple phone and, just before I reach home, switch on my AC so that the room is cooled, rather than leaving the AC on at 24 degrees to cool it the whole day. So it's really, I agree, it comes down to the education. But what we're starting to see is that businesses here, both B2G or B2B or B2C, are becoming more conscious and want to live that moral, sustainable kind of lifestyle. And so, due to pressures, be it from economic perspectives, but own personal, choices, we're starting to see them change their patterns and become more responsible. So it is ensuring, smart meters are incorporated in irrigation systems, or introducing solar panels in your dwellings or your houses. There's still, I think, a lot of development that needs to come about regarding the regulation and policy about renewable energy in households and connecting it back to the grid. But all of this is so rapidly evolving that I think in the next 2 to 3 years we're going to see a scale up on the energy efficiency and the consumer behavior becoming more in the limelight.
Thank you. And I think that pace of change of consumer behavior clearly very, very important. And the best way to save a ton of carbon is to save it today. Energy efficiency today is much better than energy efficiency in 10 years' time. We talked a lot about education there, and educating the next generations. But Graeme, you're an educated consumer. You've taken a lot of personal leadership, I guess, out of the sort of changes that you've made. Do you concur with the other panelists about what to do and how to do it, having made a number of changes yourself, of course?
Yeah, so let's do two things. I think there is that education piece is really critical, but I also think you need certainty. So the nice thing I observed from a UK perspective is we had, looking backwards, the end of the sale across Europe of the incandescent bulb. Now, a lot of people at the time thought, well, that was going to be terrible. But we now don't go to a hardware store and buy a bulb and say, can I have a climate friendly, super intelligent, low efficient light bulb? You just say, can I have one with an Edison screw, right? So what we've done is we've normalized it because we had those legislative certainty. So in the same way in the UK, we have the end of the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. It gives you that certainty. So I think for me, it's a combination of things. have certainty, and then educate people to what does that mean. So that's the first thing. I mean, I guess at a personal level, I think it's important, firstly, that the energy utilities have a voice. So, last year I went on a car show. National Grid is not a maker of electric cars. We don't do car charging. We don't buy electricity or sell electricity. And so it was really interesting for me that the BBC chose an energy business to talk about how we were going to transition to electric cars, because it's a car show. Surely you'd ask the car industry. And so it was really interesting that we're now finding a level of confidence and, I guess, thought leadership as utilities to be able to be brave enough to talk about what we know and what we don't know, and that's really, really important. But I also think a lot of people will level at us that you just are telling us to do something. So actually showing by doing is really important. So, as a business, we have a zero emission company car policy. You can only have an electric company car. So we are north of 700 electric cars on fleet in the UK today. We're 60 electric vans on fleet, and we will decarbonise our own van fleet. But also, as you say, as individuals. So what you can see around me here is a small window on my world. My 600 years old. And 11 years, it has been heated with ground source heat pumps. So my garden has been helping to heat my home and hot water. I'm a traditional, I guess, what you'd call a petrol, but I've been an EV driver since 2017. And actually, I even go as far as treating all my own wastewater. So actually, everything that flows out of the drains here goes through a biodigester in the garden. So actually, the only emission my home makes is clean water. And if I can do that in a really difficult to do 600-year-old house, then you can kind of do it everywhere. Now, admittedly, I have a professional job and I can afford to try and make some of those leaps. But say you can heat pumps and really highly insulated. My 600-year-old house has no insulation. It's a case of if you specify them right, you understand the leakage of a building, then you can plan to do that. I'd also say, there's a learning by doing here. I've moved 73% of my electricity demand to off-peak periods, when the grid is cleanest and cheapest. Now, I mean I run around my house switching things on and off. I outsource it to apps. So, my EV charging is managed by an app. My heat pump at the moment is on a timer. That's a bit frustrating. I'm waiting for an app to try and manage that. But there's also education piece. The one thing I was going to pull up here is, from a grid business, we share things like when to plug in app. So that's saying, if you're going to have to charge a car or run your washing machine or tumble dryer, the time today to run it is between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. And you can press a little button on your app and it'll set you alerts. So even if you don't have technology that it does it automatically, there's some of that partial enablement that done so the body can make that small. And one of the comments previously is everybody does a little bit, you get quite a long way. So the UK, just by changing to LED light bulbs, we took 10% out of our peak energy demand. And so when people say we can't make the transition to net zero because we'll all be living in caves and we'll all be sat there in the dark wearing loincloths and eating grass, do you know what? We've already been on that transition and we're still sat here in light. We are on that transition. It's just how do we normalize that?
Fantastic. Brilliant way to finish. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. So listen, thanks to Mathieu, thanks to Graeme, thanks to Daxita, Jenny, Guro, absolutely fantastic conversations, some brilliant ideas and some really practical ideas as well about what to do and how to do it. And I guess my final challenge to the audience is taking up that personal challenge that some of the panelists have identified there. What are you going to do to take personal leadership in terms of reducing your carbon footprint? The panelists hinted, well, maybe sort of hinted quite strongly. My challenge to them was, do you know your own personal carbon footprint? And the answer was, we're not really quite sure about it. But I mean, there's plenty of apps out there, to be able to do it. If you know where you're starting from, then the steps that you can take. And maybe it's LED light bulbs, maybe it's heat pumps, maybe it's something else. So my challenge to everybody who's watching is calculate your starting point and then think about the steps that you need to take. You've got time to do it, but the quicker you do it, the more you'll save. And particularly at the moment when energy prices are extremely high and extremely volatile, now is the time to start saving money. Because when we go into next winter, it's going to be a real challenge, as Guro said. Very, very painful in Norway last winter, and I'm sure it's going to hit us all. So thank you very much to the panelists. Thanks for everybody for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the debate. I certainly have. It's been absolutely superb. Thank you very much indeed, and take care.
Thanks a lot, Ian. I'm sort of scrambling around trying to find out my personal carbon footprint, because I have a feeling that's going to be a regular question being asked. So that was a brilliant panel. I mean, I expected it to be great. And I think what I liked about it so much is you had different views from different continents. And I think we're all in this together in terms of decarbonising the networks. But it's very interesting to see what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Norway, what's happening in the UK, what's happening in Belgium. And I think it's good to have that sort of that difference of opinion. But it does show also how we all have the same problems. It's interesting what Jenny mentioned about how they were handing out LED light bulbs. That's never heard that before. That's definitely quite unique. But again, we sort of talked about policy, regulation, how significant it is. But I think what I took from that panel is how we all need to sort of show some leadership. Because I think when sometimes you look at what you're doing yourself, you think, oh, it's only myself. That's not going to make a difference. But if you start doing it, someone else will start doing it, especially in the age of social media, that people can just post something that I'm doing this and someone else will look at it and follow it and do the same. So I think there's some real lessons to be learned from that panel. So fantastic sort of opinions from everyone. And I like Daxita's comment about water being the new coal. First time I've heard that. Really, really interesting comment. And it's good to see, obviously, the Middle East, but also Norway, two huge oil and gas nations, leading the way for energy transition, especially hydrogen, and what's happening in hydrogen in both regions. Really, really exciting stuff. I liked what Guro mentioned about applied hydrogen in Norway, what they're doing with them. Very interesting stuff that they're doing over there. So, but obviously, one point as well, what Jenny mentioned, it's about education. I think educating people, not just our age or older, but also the children, the people sort of, who are learning in school. So it's actually learned from the top down. I think that's really, really important for the next generation as well. So fantastic panel. Thanks, Ian, for moderating that as absolutely brilliantly, as I expected.